Hi guys, welcome back. I hope you all are doing great and I hope you enjoyed the last podcast I had made and I hope you guys enjoyed this one. So in this podcast, we will have a case that happened in the past and a case that is currently happening as of right now in 2024. So with one of the assignments for my forensic science class or my CSI class, we did an assignment on memory, for example, trying to remember a picture that was given for a short period of time. For this assignment, Wayland had about 30 seconds to remember the picture, and I had to draw by hand what I remember from the image. What I thought was interesting about this assignment was that it showed me how it is very important to have multiple witnesses at a crime scene because it will help the authorities and or crime scene investigators help identify the suspect or help them figure out what happened at the scene. So there is this case that I have found off of line, which is called the murder of Kitty Genovese. It happened around 1964. So this is about the case. So Catherine Susan Kitty Genovese was born on July 7th of 1935 in Brooklyn, New York, to Italian-American parents. Out of the five, Genovese was the oldest, and her siblings were raised in a four-family row house in Park Slope, which was a neighborhood that was known for housing Italians and Irish families. As a teenager, Genovese had attended Prospect Heights High School, an all-girls school, where she had thrived in her English and music classes and was elected class cut-up among her graduating class of 712 students. She was always known as a talkative and energetic person who was very popular in school. In 1954, her mother witnessed a horrifying murder that had prompted the family to move out of the city and to New Canaan, Connecticut. Genovese had just graduated high school at that time and had not decided to follow her family to the suburbs, so she instead wanted to remain in the city with her grandparents to prepare for her upcoming marriage to Rocco Anthony Fazoliere. Fazoliere, who was an army officer and engineer, had dated Genovese while he was in college and she was in high school. And although the couple did marry on October 31st of 1954, the marriage was soon ended and they two had divorced in 1956. In the late 1950s, Genovese had moved to an apartment of her own in Brooklyn and had begun working as a bartender after she found her work as a secretary to be too unappealing. So in March of 1963, Genovese had met Mary Ann Zielonko at Swing Rendezvous, which was an underground lesbian bar in Greenwich Village. The two had fell fast for one another and ultimately decided to move in together. They both had found an apartment on the second floor of a two-story building next to the Long Island Railroad in Kew Gardens, Queens, New York. This new apartment in Kew Gardens would be the last place Genovese had ever lived. Her brutal murder had left the entire community feasted, and after startling reports came out that 38 witnesses had saw or heard the attack but had failed to act. So Genovese's story had gained widespread attention. So at around 2:30 in the morning on March 13th of 1964, Genovese had begun driving home to her Kew Gardens apartments. She was so eager to get home so that she could see her girlfriend on their first anniversary. When Genovese was at a traffic light on Hoover Avenue, Genovese was first spotted by Winston Mosley, who had sat in his parked car. Mosley, a 28-year-old man who would punch data cards for a business machines company, had left his wife and two sons asleep in their home in Ozone Park, Queens. At around 1 in the morning, he then drove around for hours with a sharp hunting knife in his pocket, looking for a victim. And just as he was about to give up, he spotted Genovese at around 3 in the morning. Roughly about 45 minutes from the time she had left the bar, Genovese had arrived home and parked her car in the Kew Gardens parking lot, in an alleyway just feet away from the door of her building. In the few steps it took her to walk towards the apartment complex, Mosley had exited his vehicle, which was parked at a bus stop on Austin Street. He then approached her with a hunting knife that he had in his pocket, and once she saw him, She tried to run away, but then he quickly overtook her and stabbed her in the back twice. With it being 3 in the morning, the area was completely desolate. Franklin's Pharmacy and Interlude Coffee House were both closed and everyone was asleep. However, due to Genevieve's screaming, she had managed to wake up one of her neighbors, who had saw her struggle and had yelled out of his window, "Leave that girl alone." This had made Mosley back away from her and left her alone. Since Mosley had just stabbed Genevieve, he was afraid of being identified, so he ran back to his car. After leaving her alone, she then managed to get back on her feet and tried to enter her apartment building, but once she made it inside, she then had collapsed on the floor before going up the stairs. While Mosley had driven away, he was covering his face with a wide-brimmed hat so that he couldn't be able to be identified. But a few minutes later, he then went back and found Genevieve barely conscious and continued to stab her before he sexually assaulted her and stealing about $49 from her. Approximately about 30 minutes later, after Mosley had first approached Genevieve, he had fled the scene, leaving her unconscious and leaving her body to be discovered by Sofia Farrar, which was one of Genevieve's closest friends. So records of the call to the police were unclear, with the multiple neighbors claiming to have called the police or called friends who called the police. It was reported that about 4:15 in the morning, Genevieve was picked up by the ambulance. Disturbance she sustained proved to be fatal, and Genevieve had died before making it to the Queens General Hospital. She was then buried 3 days later in Lakeview Cemetery in New Canaan, Connecticut. Following the incident, the coroner's report revealed that Genevieve had suffered from 13 stab wounds and several other defense wounds, indicating that she had tried to fight back. Homicide detectives had then begun to search for her attacker, initially interviewing Zielonko, who was Genevieve's girlfriend. They had quickly dismissed her as a suspect, but only after having grilled her for 6 hours about her relationship with Genevieve. Just 6 days after the proof of murder, Winston Mosley was arrested for a suspect of robbery in Ozone Park, Queens, after a television set was found in the trunk of his white Chevrolet Cobra. A detective had remembered that the same colored car had been reported by witnesses to Genevieve's murder. During questioning, Mosley admitted to having murdered Genevieve and 2 other women, Anna Mae Johnson and Barbara Kralik. He was then found guilty of all 3 murders and sentenced to death on June 15th of 1964. However, his sentence was later reduced to 20 years to life after escaping Attica prison in 1968, which added an additional 30 years onto his life sentence and being denied parole 18 times. He then died in prison on March 28th of 2016 at 81 years old. This case is what people call the bystander effect, which is a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to offer help in the presence of others, and is often cited as a rationale of why no one aided Kitty Genevieve. Witnesses may have assumed that others would intervene, refusing individual responsibility to act. Furthermore, uncertainty or fear of misinterpretation might have the third action in the Kitty Genevieve's case. It was initially reported that about 38 neighbors were awakened by her screams. It was found later that the neighbors witnessed her murder, but 2 of which called the police, and no one intervened until the attacker left. Although 38 witnesses have been determined to be an overestimated number of the people who were aware that Mosley was attacking Genevieve, this gruesome attack continues to represent a common psychological phenomenon, which is called the bystander effect. So a case that is currently happening as of right now of 2024 is called the Summerfield murder trial that continues with medical examiners and witness testimonies. So on Tuesday, it was conducted day 2 of the John Summerfield murder trial. Summerfield is a man charged with a murder after a Christmas night shooting in 2022. Summerfield is accused of murdering a 50-year-old Bobby Tabor, with whom he had a working relationship. According to the police reports, both men were drinking alongside 2 teenagers in an office building when a fight broke out between the 2 men, and police had said Summerfield shot Tabor. While both men were taken to Baptist Health for their injuries, Tabor had unfortunately succumbed to his injuries and passed away. Multiple people had took the stand for the prosecution on Tuesday, which including Paducah Police Detective Danny Slack. Much like day 1's testimony from the lead investigator on the case, Slack had pointed out inconsistencies between the crime scene and Summerfield's recount of what happened. That he was asleep in his office when he woke up to a punch from Tabor. Where Mr. Tabor was located by officers, there was nothing in the office that we located or looked to be consistent with what described happened, said Slack. The prosecution, Chuck Walter, also called Paducah Police Detective Kevin Wilson to the stand. Wilson had also recalled the scene of the crime, but specifically Walker asked him questions pertaining to a robbery, because in 2022, Summerfield told police that Tabor tried to rob him. Wilson testified that despite canvassing the entire scene, detectives found nothing that would paint a picture of robbery. When questioned by the defense, Taylor Brown Wilson confirmed checking Tabor's car for items. Brown specifically asked if Wilson checked Tabor's overalls that he had taken off before the fight. Wilson said he did not and wasn't sure if the overalls were checked. Reporters also heard testimony from the medical examiners that confirmed Tabor's cause of death. He confirmed he was drunk before he was killed and suffered from multiple bruises. The bruises she described as being either caused by Tabor being hit by a blunt object or running into one. The prosecution called its final witnesses Tuesday before it conducted. Browning brought this first witness, the operations manager of Huffman Construction, the business where the incident happened. He testified that there was no issue between Tabor and Summerfield before this incident happened. So this trial is set to continue at 9 a.m. on Wednesday in the McCracken County Courthouse. Alright, so that is the end of this podcast. I hope you guys enjoy, and I will see you guys on the next podcast. Bye.